Welcome back to Musings from the Mountains. My name is Zach Anderson, joined alongside Keenan Cummins and our special guest, Brandon Hellwig, the publisher of UCF Sports.com. Brandon, it's great to have you. It's a big game coming up this weekend between UCF, West Virginia, two teams coming off a loss. UCF has been in a lot of close games. They failed to get their first Big 12 win this season. So first of all, let's just go into a little bit about what you're going to see on Saturday and what you expect from this matchup. Brandon, happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's a big game. UCF, obviously new to the Big 12 this season. They hosted their first Big 12 game. It was about a month ago. It was September 28th against Baylor. So this is just going to be the second, Big 12 home game ever for UCF. I know it's a bit early. UCF fans aren't a huge fan of the 12 noon starts, but it is a sellout, and I expect a great atmosphere. And I know, we know a lot of West Virginia fans will be making the trip down to Florida, so it should be a good atmosphere.
I have a question for you, Brandon. Now, UCF, Central Florida. When people call them Central Florida, is that something that upsets their fan base, or
it's been a thing for probably, I want to say 25 years or so. I guess as UCF kind of transitioned to 1A FBS in 1996, it was all about consistent branding and everything. Of course, they didn't do themselves any favors by being known as Golden Knights and then dropping Golden. And now it's just Knights. And then when the Vegas Golden Knights in the NHL franchise a couple years ago, when they joined the NHL, everyone all of a sudden started thinking UCF was the Golden Knights again, because they kind of had the Golden Knights out of the system. But yeah, UCF always has been wanted to be known as UCF, not Central Florida. It just goes back to that, perception, directional school mindset, kind of the max school type thing. And so they want to be, you don't refer, you don't say Louisiana State, you probably don't say Brigham Young, you probably don't say Texas Christian. So it's kind of in that same vein that they only want to be known as UCF. And if you use Central Florida or Golden Knights and it's on Twitter or something, the fans will see it and let you hear it. If you're broadcasting a game, if you're an announcer and you see it, you will get a deluge of angry tweets.
About this UCF team, they obviously they haven't got a win yet in the league, but they've played better, played really well on the road at Oklahoma. What have you seen? Was it as simple as having a bye week to get ready, get healthier? What kind of caused them to play as well as they did on the road?
Well, you're talking about the Oklahoma game last week. The bye week had a lot to do with it. It remains to be seen whether Oklahoma is a sign for optimism. I think everyone associated with UCF is hoping that is the case because, just to kind of go back a few games, there's been issues. Starting quarterback John Rice Plumlee gets hurt in the second game. They got to start their Big 12 schedule with the backup quarterback who did decently, but, is not he's not the starting quarterback for a reason. He's not as good as John Rice Plumlee. So, the offense was able to still put up some points, but probably wasn't as efficient as they would have been with Plumlee. The defense had, some injury. Every school at this point of the season has, ankles and hamstrings and whatnot. And they had a few guys that were limited in some of those early Big 12 games. The bye week allowed those guys to heal up and come back. But then UCF has a brand new defensive coordinator this year. Addison Williams, his very first year calling a defense, devising game plans. And so, a lot of people had optimism that, he was ready for the job. Who knows? So they get to the bye week, they restructure some things defensively. Tackling. I know tackling was an issue for West Virginia last week. That had been an issue for UCF, particularly in that Kansas game. So they kind of went back to the basics. We're able to get some guys back from injury and played a lot better. Now, Oklahoma, just with what they like to do, they're not a team that, they still want to, try to push the ball downfield and throw the ball. And, Kansas and Kansas State, I think they learned that you could run the ball in every single down, and UCF just couldn't stop it, or at least not stop, a 3 or 4 yard gain. And that happens every down. That leads to a lot of first downs. I think Kansas State, I don't even know, they might have set the record, or at least the record in the recent history in the amount of most first downs in a game. And that's just, UCF just couldn't stop those 3, 4, 5 yard gains on every single play. Now, West Virginia is going to come in and, they're going to run the ball a lot more than Oklahoma did. I think UCF's defense has a pretty good secondary, at least a decent secondary, but, can they stop the run against a team that's going to be, more dedicated to the run than maybe Oklahoma was? That's kind of the question we all have coming into this game.
So Brandon, oh, go ahead.
The last general one I had here is, what do you think, has this been an awakening, kind of a realization of sorts for UCF fans just coming up and playing in the Big 12? I know from West Virginia's perspective, when they moved into the league, a lot of fans were expecting immediate success. They started out 5-0, ended up 7-6. So West Virginia's been in this situation. Has that been kind of, I don't want to say accepting because there's a lot of season left, but has it been kind of a wake-up call in a sense that it is a different level of football week in, week out?
It's probably not only a wake-up call for the fan base, but I think the coaching staff too. I think they expected to, assuming everything goes right, and it didn't because your starting quarterback went down with an injury in the second game. I think they were expecting to come in and, compete, maybe better than they had, because on paper, what this doesn't mean anything, but when you look at recruiting rankings, you look at transfer recruiting rankings, UCF's been recruiting at a Power 5 type level. Now that's not a Texas or Oklahoma level, but if you look at West Virginia and Kansas State and Oklahoma State and Baylor, UCF's been recruiting on paper on par with those programs, at least the last couple of years, and they've known they've been going into the Big 12 for 2 years. So they can recruit with that. They can, they were able to, there was recruits in this, last year's recruiting class was best ever in school history. They had, recruits, that literally could have gone anywhere. Could have gone to Florida, Florida State, Michigan, Ohio State, specifically talking about defensive tackle John Walker, but there was other guys like that. They could have gone a lot of places. So they've been recruiting at a pretty high level. And I think the expectation was, assuming all goes well, I think everyone knows the Big 12 is a competitive league and there's no weeks off. There's no gimme games. There's no Temple coming on the schedule that you could just kind of roll into it, half asleep and you'll win by 50, which it had kind of been the case the last couple of years, especially with Temple. But yeah, so you're right. It has been a wake up call for the fan base. And I think the coaching staff as well, that they'll just have to kind of reconfigure and see, what needs to change, I guess. It may be too late to be competing for a conference championship this year, but what needs to happen to build a team that's capable of doing that in the future.
So Keenan actually segued into my next question perfect, because a new Big 12 team, the other coaches, WVU fans, they don't have a lot of tape on you guys. They're not familiar with your guys' game. So if you had to pick out a strength, what would you say the strength of this UCF team is this year? Something that WVU fans should watch out for?
Yeah, I would still say the strength is probably UCF's running game. If John Rice Plumlee is healthy, and we've been talking about, he had a knee strain at the end of the Boise State game in week 2. So he's got this monster brace on his leg. His running ability is a big part of his skill set. And, there were signs that he was there a little bit this past game, but he's not, if you're wearing a brace, you're never going to be 100%. You're not going to be as fast as you were previously. So he's a big element of that. They got a couple of really good running backs. RJ Harvey is the guy who will see the most carries. He's a bigger, more physical back. He ran for 100+ yards against Oklahoma. Johnny Richardson is a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit speedier. If he gets a seam, he could always break off for a big run. I think he has a pretty good average yards per carry. I will say the running game is the strength. They've kind of gotten, when Kansas game a few weeks ago, when they got down early, they kind of got away from that. And a lot of people said, maybe still should have been consistent with the run. But if there is one strength, I would say it's running the football.
How about on the defensive side? What does UCF want to do, and who are the guys that kind of make the engine go? Is this a unit that's been getting better throughout the season? I know you mentioned they've struggled against the run, but have they been getting better, or really kind of much of the same?
Well, if we look at Oklahoma, and if that's a trend and not an anomaly, then yeah, they are getting better, because it was kind of, there was only one way to go up, I guess, after that Kansas game when he allowed 399 rushing yards. That was pretty bad. Kansas didn't even they didn't even have to throw the ball. I think they threw the ball like once in the second half. Like they just handed the ball off every down. And, so there was only one way to go. And that was an improved performance at Oklahoma, which I kind of talked about. The bye week helped a lot with that. But if I had to say a strength, what we thought was a strength going into the season and what, appeared to be more of a strength last week was the defensive line. They were able to get some pressure on OU quarterback Dylan Gabriel. I know that was actually kind of personal for some of those D linemen, that could be in that Dylan Gabriel is a former UCF quarterback, and some of those D linemen, they were still around a few years ago when he was on the team. Tremon Morris-Brash, one of the defensive ends, he leads the Big 12 in sacks and TFLs. I think he has 6 sacks, 13 and a half TFLs, if memory serves. So he's a top spot in the Big 12 in both categories. They got another defensive end with 5 sacks. So they've been able to get after the quarterback. They did get their best defensive tackle, Ricky Barber. He had been limited. He didn't play, I think, in week 3, he didn't play. The Baylor game, Kansas game, and the Baylor game he barely played. Kansas game he didn't play at all. So he had been not really in action, honestly, for UCF's Big 12 slate. With the bye week, he was able to come back from his minor injury, and so that was a big addition. I think that helped a lot against Oklahoma. Now they did have a couple, every game there's a lineman or someone just kind of they're out on the ground, they sprained an ankle. I'm not sure exactly what it is. There were a couple of defensive linemen that kind of had that. It didn't look like it was, super serious stuff that would keep him out, but there are some guys banged up. But if there was a strength, I would say it's that defensive front. I think secondary would be right behind them. Weakness, though, by far is linebacker. They really only have one really consistent guy in Jason Johnson. There's not a lot of depth there. They've had some injury issues. They just don't really have much experience. And that's really where I think they've been hurt the most this season.
Question I wanted to ask you about too, kind of kicking back to, we were talking about the transition. And now I noticed when West Virginia, when they jumped to the Big 12, where they struggled was depth, on the offensive line, defensive line. First 5, first 3, first 4, fine. But you looked at those Big 12 teams, they were rolling 2, 3 deep. Is that where you've seen the biggest issues at this stage? And is that where they need to develop the program?
Yeah, and that was UCF's transfer portal philosophy. I think now, when you recruit players, you always want to act like everyone you recruit, it's an open book. You think they're going to come in and compete for starting jobs, but it kind of seemed like a lot of the transfer portal strategy, I thought anyway, was more along the lines of building up the depth. They were recruiting guys, if they beat out the guy who's coming back, great. But I think they were recruiting a lot of these guys because they thought they had experience and that they would be, good depth players, good backup, good reserve players. They've honestly fizzled a lot of the transfer guys they recruited have been non-factors that they thought were going to come in and play big roles and just haven't. There was a linebacker from University of Georgia. And you're like, hey, Georgia, he played a little bit. He started a couple games last year at linebacker. His name is Ryan Davis. He's from the Orlando area. They had high expectations that he would be part of the linebacking core, and he's been a non-factor. He's been honestly pretty bad when he's been on the field. He didn't even play in the last game. They've had other guys in the secondary that, they thought were going to provide depth. And I don't even know if they're on the travel squad. Like, we don't even see them. They had, wide receivers that came in aren't really doing anything. And so, I think that's kind of was by it. But yeah, that's what we've seen. UCF's defense played honestly pretty well through 3 quarters at OU. And by the time they got to the 4th quarter, I mean, they were winded. I mean, they allowed 2 touchdowns in quick succession to OU, and they were just tired by that point. They don't have a whole lot of depth. I mean, we haven't seen it as much this year, but even last year, like, they had defensive ends that played every single snap. Like, they had, their team captain, Josh Seliscar, and this is defensive end. Okay. This isn't, secondary guys. Some of these guys are in better shape. It's not totally rare if one of the corners plays every snap. They had a defensive end playing every single snap. And that's kind of continued into this year. Their starting linebacker never comes off the field, Jason Johnson. I almost think in every game, except a couple of games, Kent State and Villanova, they had big leads. If it's been a game that goes down to the wire, he doesn't come off the field. And that has been a big issue. And that's probably going to be the biggest thing they have to correct if they want to compete in the Big 12.
That's something that I noticed with West Virginia pretty much immediately when they got in the league. You got to start playing Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and they were rolling out guys on their second and third team that were just as good as their first team. And you start to, hey, now I understand this transition type of deal, what needs to occur. And West Virginia's kind of gotten to that point in a lot of degrees, and obviously UCF and a lot of those schools will as well. But special teams. We don't talk about special teams a lot, but what are the strengths for the Knights? What are their weaknesses there?
UCF has a really good field goal kicker, Colton Boomer. He had a walk-off field goal at Boise State to win that game. His time expired. He's been very consistent. Last year, he made every field. He was perfect. Okay. He was essentially perfect on every field goal. There was some dumb thing they tried to do in one game where they tried to act like they were going to kick a field goal, and they were trying to get a team to, I don't know what they were trying to do, but they didn't really want to kick it, and the long snapper snapped it anyway. I think they were trying to draw a team offsides. I don't know what they were trying to do, but that was the only one he missed, and it was going to be like 58 yards or something like that. That one shouldn't count. But other than that one, he was perfect last year, and I don't have his stats in front of me, but he's been close to perfect this year. I think he has missed one or two. He had 3 field goals in the game at Oklahoma. He was perfect in that game. I mean, I guess you could say he was a reason UCF had a fourth quarter lead. They were winning 23-17 a few minutes into the fourth quarter. I mean, if they could have scored touchdowns instead of field goals on those 3 attempts, they win that game. But if it has to come down to a field goal, he's been pretty consistent. He can, he's got a decent leg. I mean, he's pretty good from, up until that 50-yard range or so. Punting wise, they have like everyone, they've got an Australian punter. He didn't have the greatest performance at OU. I think it was there was a wind issue early on. They've kind of had some lapses at times on some of the coverage teams. They went back to the basics, and that looked improved last week. But, if you had to say kicking wise, UCF has a pretty good one there.
So, Brandon, if you had to pick out some keys on Saturday for UCF to get the win, lay it out for us. What do you think the Knights need to do to get the win? And what is WVU going to bring that's going to challenge them?
Well, UCF has to show they have to show that, the Oklahoma defensive performance is something that's going to continue and carry over into West Virginia against a team that we know is going to run the ball. They're going to have to show they can stop the run. I mean, Oklahoma was still, they like to throw the ball, and, that probably played to UCF defense's benefit, that they didn't have to defend the run constantly. So they're going to have to prove that they can stop the run against the team that's going to be committed to doing it. Offensively, you hope that John Rice Plumlee is closer to 100%. I think when he is, this offense is kind of hard to stop. Now they've sometimes had some red zone efficiency issues. You could say that about any team. You're in the red zone, you want to score touchdowns, and when you have to settle for field goals, I guess the good news is they got a pretty good field goal kicker, so they feel confident they'll always get 3 points, but you'd rather have 7. They need to be efficient offensively. Basic stuff like not turning the ball over, obviously, that kind of killed them in that Baylor game. It was, that was a meltdown. That was an epic meltdown there were so many things in that game you could point to. They were winning 35-10 in the fourth quarter, 35-10, and they lose the game. So everything that went wrong did. I think maybe UCF fans get they don't feel quite as bad because like a week or two later, it was Colorado blew that game against Stanford. That was pretty bad. And I think everyone fell asleep. But Boise blew a game against Colorado State, I think in the wee hours of the morning a couple weeks ago. That was just about as bad as that game. So UCF isn't alone in terms of an epic fourth quarter meltdown. But yeah, they just the UCF defense just has to show that they can stop the run. But yeah, it'll be a good time. It'll be a fun atmosphere. UCF fans are looking forward to this game. I mean, I know West Virginia just kind of sees this as one of these newcomers, to the Big 12, but, this is an Eastern time zone. This is probably, the game that, I'm not going to say it's a rivalry yet, but just, just the fact that, at least they're in the Eastern time zone. I think UCF fans are looking forward to, future games with the Mountaineers, and also knowing that there's a lot of WVU fans in Florida, and I'm sure it'll be a good back and forth atmosphere as far as that goes.
Yeah, West Virginia knows a thing or two about epic meltdowns of late, so should be
Yeah,
should
hey,
be interesting.
I.e. Houston, just mark Houston.
But thanks a lot, Brandon. Really
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
you
you.
coming on here and offering your insight, man. And we'll see you here soon.
All right, I'll talk to you guys, and I appreciate you joining me on my podcast earlier this week, Keenan. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, looking at this matchup, I'm going to give you the floor. I typically go first. I'm going to give it to you. How do you see this matchup? How do you see this playing out? And who do you got winning, Zach?
It's definitely difficult because I mean, just like the coaching staff, just like the fans, I don't know a whole lot about this UCF team. They're new to me. I mean, everybody knows them for their 2019 campaign, going undefeated and the claimed national championship. We saw the sign behind Brandon in his room. Um, you know them for that, and now they've transitioned into Power Five football, and they haven't won a Big 12 game yet. So I think this is definitely a winnable game. Now the atmosphere is going to play a factor. UCF is known for having a great atmosphere, but WVU's been through that, done that against Penn State, of course. So um, it's definitely a tough one to pick, Keenan. There's a lot that needs to go in West Virginia's way because I think the Houston game might have beaten them twice, especially against Oklahoma State in the fourth quarter. Whenever you let Ollie Gordon run for 280 yards, and if Brandon said the strength of the UCF team is running the football with the quarterback, then that's something that they're gonna have to key in on. But I'll take WVU. I've been sticking by them. I'll take WVU to bounce back in a tight win. I'm gonna say 24-21.
Low scoring. I would definitely, I've gone back and forth on this one, and I do this sometimes. Usually I'm just convinced, but now I'm a little shaken. I hit on every prediction I made in terms of game scores through the first 5 weeks. Every single one
Yeah.
I got right. I'm 0 for 2. Oh, I'm on a 2-game losing streak
To be
right
fair, these
now.
last two
And
games were completely unpredictable. Completely
yes,
unpredictable.
they all count though. So I'm now 5-2 on the season,
I haven't been
but
keeping track of my record.
which is a better record than West Virginia has, by the way.
That is
But
true. Yep. Yep.
I do think that this is a game where I think one of two things are going to happen. Either West Virginia is going to come out motivated, ready to play, and kind of getting back to the basics, especially on defense. This is a team that we've seen them play well on defense. It's on tape. It isn't on tape the last 2 weeks, but it's on tape. It can happen. I think that we've seen Neil do this in the past. Talk about getting back to the basics on defense. They come out more inspired. You're either going to see that this team's going to come out ready to fight, ready to say, all right, you're in the Big 12, we're on the road, but you know what? We've been a Power 5 program for 10 years. We're going to win this football game. Or you're going to see things roll downhill the bad way. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any between in this game. I think West Virginia's either going to fight or this thing can get away from them. I think it's going to be the former. I think West Virginia is going to win this game. I do not think it'll be as low scoring as you do. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think both these defenses, I think West Virginia is going to play better defensively, but I think UCF speed is going to give them a little bit of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I think West Virginia is going to win this game. If they don't, we're going to have a very interesting week next week. If this team falls to 4-4 after starting 4-1 the way they did, hard to believe that you could have that big of a swing in a month. West Virginia entered this month 4-1. Thinking that they could be a dark horse to potentially slide into that Big 12 championship game. And if they leave the month 4-4, limping out of October, there's going to be a lot of questions to ask. But good thing for you, we'll have you covered. We'll ask those questions. We will dive into whatever happens, good or bad, in favor of West Virginia. We have coverage on the site right now throughout the week. Get to know UCF. We got some stuff from Brandon in written form, if you prefer that, in our Behind Enemy Lines feature. Got a lot of other stuff looking at the matchup, things that need to happen. And as always, we'll have you covered after the game. So WVSports.com, tune in. And this has been another edition of Musings from the Mountains.